You're tuned into 9 to 5 Work Rebels with your host, Ebony Gale. This series is sponsored by the PRCA's Race and Ethnicity Equity Board. To learn more about REEB and its mentoring scheme, visit prca.org.uk/REEB.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to Gems in Comms series special brought to you by 9 to 5 Work Rebels. I am your host, Ebony Gale, and today I'm really excited to be speaking with Michelle Agyeman-Coley, who is the founder and MD of Future Brand Thinking. It's a forward-thinking agency that works in partnerships with their clients, represent clients in the fashion and the beauty and lifestyle world. So welcome, Michelle.
Thank you for having me, Ebony.
Oh, you are most welcome. So I always start off by saying the reason that I started this series is essentially to spotlight, people of color within the communications industry. So those from the global majority within the comms, PR, marketing industries that have carved out a great career for themselves, essentially, carving out a nice piece of the pie for yourself. So well done to you in a majority, white industry. So kudos to you and your flowers for you.
Thank you.
You are welcome. So, of course, I'd like to start off by asking you to tell us about yourself. So what is it that you do? And can you let us know if you've always wanted to work in the communications industry?
Okay. As you've already said, so I'm Michelle Agyeman-Coley, and I founded Future Brand Thinking in 2021, January 2021. So we have our 4th birthday coming up next year, early next year. Very exciting. That is my kind of newest journey in comms. Before that, I had been in PR, working at various agencies, kind of name all the big agencies in fashion, lifestyle, and beauty I have worked at, with some really great experiences and memories along the way, working on fantastic clients. So for the last 20 years before I started Future Brand Thinking, I was heading up fashion teams, in director roles. I worked myself up from a press assistant in-house to mainly working on the agency side. And it just seemed like a very natural kind of transition to move into owning my own agency again. I had a brief stint around 2006 of owning my own agency. It was called Savvy PR and Marketing.
Yeah.
And I owned that agency for 2.5 years.
Yeah.
A lot of people know me around that time because I'd just come from like a big agency. I went to another brief stint at an agency, and then I started that agency, and we looked after mainly small brands, startups, a bit similar to what I'm doing now, but also very different, because we look after mainly brands that are owned, run, and led by people of color at Future Brand Thinking. So that wasn't quite the direction I was going in back then. So yeah, my time in comms has been a long time. I feel privileged to have worked in comms for this amount of time. I recently did a panel talk at 180 with Soho House, and there were a whole line of panelists, including people like Karen Binns, Bernice Brobbery, Karen Williams, who's a stylist, and we had a really amazing panel. And all along the line, we'd all been in comms, PR, fashion, styling for a minimum of 2 decades. So it was just really fantastic to be on a panel line of such icons, and that was really brilliant. And it kind of just hit home as well that I'd been in the industry for such a long time. Because when we started talking about how we first met each other, magazines that no longer exist, the stylists were working at, we've seen kind of really big editors now. We've watched them grow in their career. We've watched them grow from fashion assistants to editors of magazines, kind of models. that are now our icons we worked with back in the day. So yeah, it kind of really put a stamp on how long I've been in the industry. So I came out of my comfort zone. I did a panel talk, and I loved it actually. So I think I'm going to do more.
Yes, do more.
Um,
Absolutely.
I,
You've got a lot to share, so you've got to get yourself
yes, yes.
out there.
Yeah, I think it's really important that I give back. I do that in many ways with my business, but in terms of kind of real time and real life experiences and being there to answer questions of kind of people coming into the industry is something that I'm definitely going to do more of. I didn't think I was coming into the fashion industry when I did, because I did a law and a business degree. But I always had a real passion for fashion. I
Yeah.
absolutely loved it. I was always drawing, I was always kind of sketching.
Okay.
Um, Models, and I was kind of, when I was younger, I was kind of more on the creative side, drawing models and drawing really beautiful outfits on them. I read all the kind of teen magazines that had a bit of fashion in them. I've always followed fashion. My family are quite stylish. My mother was very stylish in the 80s, and definitely in the 70s before I came along. So, there's always been an innate passion for fashion, but
Yeah.
when I did my degree, it wasn't a direction I was going into. I met someone by chance. They introduced me to comms. I didn't really know what PR was. There
Mm.
was no real degrees at that point that
Right.
were fully um, communications or PR, and now there is. So I didn't really have that in mind in terms of a career. I fell into it by accident, but I'm super glad I did because it was definitely my destination. It was definitely my job. It was the place that I was meant to kind of grow into that role. So yeah, I started off in-house at a brand called Kukai. Some
Okay.
people may remember. And yeah, it kind of all happened from there. The rest, as they say, is kind of history. All started then.
Really interesting. Really interesting that you've done the law degree as well, and then you end up going down this direction, which is fascinating. And I
It's
suppose
been very useful, actually.
I
I've
bet
got to
it has
be,
been definitely.
yeah,
I mean, it's definitely useful in contracts, all types of things that
yeah.
you've got to do. So absolutely. But I was going to ask you, so what do you feel like attracted you to kind of the industry? What was it that you were like, oh, actually, I like this, and I feel like I'm going to stay here.
I think the communication side, I was very much, I knew that I got on with people and I could communicate, various stories, whether it was me just telling someone about something. I found out very quickly, working at Kukai, that I was very personable. I seemed to get on with all the stylists and the editors. Um, I kind of, it just felt very, very natural. I was given tasks and I kind of hit the ground running, as you say.
Yeah.
It didn't feel alien to me, considering it was a career path that I'd never thought
Studied.
about
Yeah.
in the past or
Yeah.
studied.
Yeah.
Um, I was attracted to, as I got more and more deeper into it, and especially when a year later I went agency side. So I was only in-house for a very short amount of time, and I learned so much in that year that I was able to walk straight into an account exec role at
Mm.
one of the biggest agencies of the time, Exposure.
Yeah.
And I went straight into working with brands like Nike, Converse, Levi's, Juicy Couture. I launched Juicy Couture into
I
the
remember that.
UK.
Yeah. Yeah.
There.
Amazing.
And yeah, I fell into it. It was definitely the career for me and I was definitely attracted to it because I was doing well at it. And if you know what I
Yeah.
mean, and I was excelling. I didn't find it very difficult to talk to press, make friends, make connections. My little black book of um, press stylists, and even back then we didn't call them, bloggers or content creators, but kind of
Yeah.
people in the industry who were what we called tastemakers at the time. So
Yeah.
they weren't celebrities, but they were people the few that influenced many. So
Yeah.
they were the few people out there that the later some of them became content creators,
Yeah.
bloggers back then. But I found it really hard, really, really easy, sorry, to communicate with those people and to sell and pitch in whatever I was kind of, PRing at the time. So I found that very attractive because I wasn't struggling in
Yeah.
that role,
Yeah.
struggling to be taken seriously either. I walked into a big agency from being in-house and from not studying communications or PR or marketing or fashion. And again, it just felt like that was the natural place for me to be.
Yeah, that's really cool. Thank you for sharing that. I think that's really interesting. And obviously, it just
Yeah.
felt very, like you said, it felt natural. And when you're
Yeah.
enjoying something and you're doing well at it, you're like, well, yeah, this feels like a good fit for me. So I think that's
Yeah,
really, really
definitely.
interesting. Were your parents on board because you would,
Yeah,
change
do you know what?
direction?
I'm very, very lucky. I've got amazing parents. My mum is brilliant. My late dad was so encouraging. He kind of, I don't think either of them really understood why my name. So I'd say, oh, I've just landed this amazing feature in the Evening Standard. And for them, they expected to open the Evening Standard, which they would rush to get after work and see my name, Michelle Agyeman, in print.
Yeah.
And it took me a lot of time to explain to them that no, I pitched that in to the journalist. It's to promote my client, and it's my client that's going to feature in that piece. You're not going to see mine.
Yeah,
And
I get that.
it's going to be. So it took them a little while to understand it. They were, they were there. My parents are from Ghana, so it was in our household. It was very academically driven. So we didn't really talk about creative roles or careers. But I wouldn't say that my parents weren't open to that. That it was just I kind of the legal path and doing law and business was my choice.
Yeah.
I've got very, very liberal and clever and bright parents, and they were never going to kind of push me in one direction. They didn't deter me from, kind of trying to carve my career in PR, even if they didn't really understand it at first. They still thought, I kind of explained them and to them enough and showed them that it was a viable career and I could make something of myself in that career and make money. So essentially, they just wanted me to be comfortable.
Yeah, that's beautiful. I love that. I love that. So again, move a little bit into your sort of lived experiences. So I always like to ask all my guests this question, which is, when did you become aware of your ethnicity? And that's not to say that you don't know the skin you're born in. It's more of the case of when did the outside world kind of meet you. So for me, I always give the example of going off to secondary school in the first year and hearing about Chelsea Smilers and being told that they'll, get razor and cut you from one side to the other. Brown and black people only because they're a group of racist white thugs. So, and they were known to kind of frequent around some not too far from the area I was heading towards. So I remember, being quite on edge. It was a case of being aware of racism, being aware that, of course, I'm a black girl in my skin, but this is where it actually met my world, So is there any point in time that you can reflect on or anything similar happen?
I think I've always been aware, like you said, of my ethnicity. However, there've definitely been some lived experiences moving from a very tight-knit community in the proper East End, deep East End in Plaistow, where my parents bought their first house. So we lived there until I was about 8 or 9. And even though it was predominantly white, it was really, really kind of East End family, very close knit. We had street parties. It was great. I didn't really think of myself as being super different. Even though we had West Ham football grounds and stadium and the thugs and the racists and the skinheads just down the road, nothing really hit me until we moved to Essex.
Okay.
Moved when I was 8 to it's borderline Essex, to be honest. It's like borderline East London, Essex, but it's got an Essex postcode. So we moved to Gants Hill, Barkingside area, and I went to a smaller school. It was even more white than the school that I'd come from. And it was there that I really kind of just thought, oh my God, I'm so different, because there were probably around 5 in total Black girls in my school across like a few years, probably my year and the year above.
Yeah.
I did feel like I really stood out, and I felt like I was so different to them. It was almost like the EastEnders done good, kind of moved into Essex. So
Mm.
they were less kind of East End, born and bred, grits and, family. They were still family orientated, but it was just a little bit different. So it just felt like I was so different. At summer holidays, they would all go off to see their grandparents in Spain or go, on some
Yeah.
kind of like family holiday. And we didn't do that. We either were being looked after by a family member, or if we were lucky, we would go to a Christian church holiday, or if we were even luckier, we would go and see family
Right.
in Ghana or America, but that would be like a really kind of planned out trip. So I feel that I just felt different just moving from one part of London to another part. And it really kind of hit me because there were so few Black girls in my across 2 year groups, like I said, the
Yeah.
year older and my year, that it did feel, and I did feel a little bit out of place as well, just even amongst my Black peers,
Yeah.
because they'd grown up, born and bred in Essex. They were quite different to the East London, like proper East End girls that looked like me.
Yeah.
So I was trying to fit in with two groups. I was trying to fit in with the majority, white girls and boys that were in my class and my
Yeah.
peer groups, and then the older girls and the girls in general, the Black girls, just trying to be, cool enough, or I don't know, with it enough to fit in with them. So I did feel that was kind of one of my earliest memories of kind of being hit with like, oh my God, I really am a little bit different to
Different.
the
Yeah.
girls in my class, the girls, even some of the Black girls in my school.
It's cool. Yeah,
Um,
absolutely.
yeah,
Interesting. Really interesting. And thank you for sharing that one. Interesting as well because like you say, it's the moving into the Essex and going through that. That's definitely a change, isn't it? Changing environment. And like you said, noticing just the differences. So that I think is really interesting. Every question, every person asks, it's different responses and just different awareness. I just found it really fascinating at what parts it hits the psyche and how it's
yeah,
kind of,
yeah, yeah.
it's fascinating. So have you ever felt like your race, ethnicity has held you back in your career at all? And have you ever experienced or witnessed racism in the workplace?
That's a really good question. I've never really kind of dwelled on it, if I'm going to be honest. And I think that's a lot to do with my upbringing. Um, but I've definitely had a few incidences where my race and ethnicity has come into play. It's on some occasions it's been quite subtle. On other occasions it's been very kind of blatant. I would say that just my personality and the way I am, I've actually learned from those experiences, and I think I'm a stronger communicator. I'm a stronger PR. I'm a stronger PR professional because of those experiences. And I think the only reason why I would even engage in going back to those experiences and talking about them is just so in hope that I can help someone else identify that that's happening, and maybe now, so many years down the line, they can do a lot more than I was able
Yeah.
to combat that and also kind of find a solution for it.
Mm.
Because my experiences kind of both actually led me to resign.
Ooh.
Um, and so I resigned from a few roles. I'm not going to name names, but I resigned from a few roles because I felt like my race had come into play, and I did not want that to be a factor for me.
Mm.
I was definitely treated in a very, very different way that wasn't positive, it wasn't kind, and it definitely wasn't inclusive, because of the color of my skin. And for me, it was quite confusing because I was employed into really senior roles at both of these places. So they knew there was no kind of hiding the fact that I was black. I've always been black. I always will be black. And I was hired for those roles, and it was way before Black Lives. There wasn't such an emphasis and focus on inclusivity and diversity. So there wasn't any reason why I was employed for those roles, in my eyes, apart from the fact that I was well known and I had a really great reputation. And, people wanted me in those roles because I could do the job. Had nothing to do with my ethnicity. So when it became about my ethnicity and I struggled to communicate that or kind of tackle it head on, it left me no other kind of opening but to resign in those roles, which was quite damaging for my confidence and my immediate growth. So it took me a long time to regain my confidence and, shy away from, retreating when asked to kind of speak up or go for other big roles, because I was like, oh, it's going to happen again. They're going to want me for this role, but without really thinking about the impact and the difference of having a woman of color in that role for stakeholders, for clients, if it's an agency, for the brands that you want to put me on, you can't, as an agency owner or founder or the big directors that are kind of employing or the HR teams, you can't, I understand that you can't manage every client's perception of the teams that are running their businesses. But in other words, now I think you should, and those agencies need to be held accountable. And all the clients that I worked for that made it tricky for me, or the directors that made it tricky for me in those roles, they should have thought all of that through before they employed me for those roles. They should have thought through, like, how's this client gonna, work with a woman of color in this very senior role on their account. All of these things, I think, now come into play, and they're very identifiable and they can be resolved. And hopefully further down the line, they just won't happen. But unfortunately for me, I've been in the industry for a long time. So I do have, sadly, quite a few instances and roles where that has happened.
Can you give us an example of one? Like, can you give us an example of something that happened? Because you said a few, so I'm like, okay, that's more than two. So let's give us something.
One role, I was hired as head of PR and marketing for a huge, very well-known British lingerie brand.
Right.
And even when I was offered the role, because I did a project for them, a freelance project, which was brilliant. And I just took out what they were famous for. They were famous for, highlighting that women were wearing the wrong bra size.
Right.
So I took that out and I made that part of our event. So all the editors turned up and they were all measured by site.
Yeah.
By site. Brilliant. So no tape measures, nothing like that.
Yeah. Amazing.
So by site. So that in itself, everyone was like, and people were going back to the office and telling people to come to the event.
Absolutely.
And we were gifting them in their size. So they would be measured by site by these amazing experts of the brand, and then they were gifted on the spot, and then they got to see the new collections, and it was just a brilliant event. And the CEO at the time was like, this is amazing. And I think they were just kind of a little bit shell-shocked. I just don't think they thought that I had the reach. One, I'd already been in the industry about 10 years, so I don't think they thought I had the reach to get most of Condé Nast Tatler.
Underestimated you.
So
Yeah.
all of those guys, Harper's Bazaar, all their big titles that are really important to them as a brand, they were there. And the
Yeah.
big M's were there, whipping off their tops, getting their, their
So cool.
sizes.
Yeah.
Right. It was a fun day, and it was brilliant. And everything down to the location was really well thought through by myself, because I'd orchestrated many events before that. So they were like, would you come and work for us as in-house PR and marketing? And it was 2008, and we were just going into a really big recession.
Yes.
So I kind of talked it through with my family, my partner at the time, and we were like, yeah, let's do it. I'm going to go in there. It's a really strange move for me, because I don't think anyone would have come into my office and expected to see a Black woman as head of PR and marketing for this brand. So in a nutshell, it was a very short-lived role. It was just under a year, and it was kind of flawed from the beginning. Stakeholders, people in the business were still very unsure, but the decision makers thought that I was brilliant, and that's why I was employed. But there were other people involved in the brand that needed to buy into me, and they very much weren't on board from the beginning. That's why I say it's really important that, if you're hiring a person of color, especially at a brand that wouldn't immediately resonate, why it shouldn't resonate, I don't know, but it's just life. All that due diligence has to happen. You have to have the right buy-in from all the stakeholders. It's really important, because if I step into a big role like that and I've got the CFO or someone big in the organization kind of going, I just don't think she's a fit, they're not going to make it easy for me.
They won't make it easy. And then you've done a great job anyway. It's clear to see that you demonstrated that you were more than capable of doing the job. You blew them away.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, you cannot change people who have their own,
perception,
and their own perceptions.
Absolutely. And I kind of got backed into a corner quite a few times. I was asked to do crazy presentations, and then I was told that they were not good, or they weren't strategic enough, and they absolutely were. I look at some of those presentations now, and I'm like, I could kind of gloss this up a little bit, and it would be very relevant. What I was talking about in those presentations is relevant to 2024, and this was 10 years ago.
Of course, they didn't like the messenger. That's all it comes down to. They
did, yeah, absolutely. So I don't feel that I didn't really have a choice. I did have a few instances where I went to events and I had to orchestrate and organize events that were kind of out of my comfort zone at that point. I was very passionate. I had to do an event with Coutts Bank. Never had to do with Coutts Bank. I don't come from a corporate PR background. So that was just so alien to me. And I had all these Coutts, kind of employees in suits, and I'm used to like wearing Converse and trainers, and
different.
It was very different. But I held my own. I did that event. And then to be told that it wasn't what they expected, it was just everything I did was wrong. From certain kind of really senior people within the business. Everything I know now as a much older woman, that I did all the right things. The events were brilliant. I went out of my comfort zone and smashed it, really.
Good.
But
sounds like it.
It was just never good enough. So in the end, I was just like, I can't actually work here. I'm not going to progress. There's some people that are stopping me from progressing. And I don't really have enough allies to kind of maneuver this situation. And I'm the only person of color in this organization.
Very
only, apart from the head of HR, or one of the HR specialists, I never met a person of color. So that was not a good experience for me, because it made me lose all of my confidence. I just thought, oh God, I've got this, I earned that role. I showed them what I could do. and they offered me, I didn't go to them for the role. They said to me, would you consider coming on board as our head of PR and marketing? My background wasn't marketing, but I could do it. So I took that big role on, and it just went on to kind of break me, really. And it's an experience that I'll always hold, sadly, because it was such a great opportunity, but it didn't land well. And like I said, the due diligence wasn't done properly from this a level to ensure that my landing in that role was smooth, seamless, and kind. There was no one behind
it wasn't that at all. But
I was left to sink or swim. And I was actually swimming, but I was also being pushed down at the same time. So that wasn't a nice experience. But I think if that happened to me now, it would be a very different experience. I would know who to go and talk to. I would know how to handle it. It would have been very different, but I was very young, much younger now than I am now.
That's fine. But I mean, I completely get what you're saying, and I appreciate you sharing that story as well, because it's an important one. Just to say that the fact that it affected your confidence is something to share, in the sense of you were doing amazingly in your career, hence why they headhunted you. You've done this amazing event, and then you get put into this role. You're still doing the best that you can do, and you're coming with some great ideas, but yet you're getting shot down. So again, it wasn't your fault. It was just the environment that you're in. And I feel like it's important that you have shared that, because sometimes there might be someone who's out there listening to this podcast and might be in an environment where they feel like, oh, I was excelling in my past environment, but now I feel like I'm not doing as good and it's affecting my confidence. Sometimes it is just the environment. You need to take yourself out of that environment and just to break free from that and realize that actually I'm good. It's not me. It's actually the people around me. Is that's an important thing to be aware of, because like you said, breaking your confidence. Imagine if you let that get to you, you wouldn't be where you are now. Do you know what I mean?
Exactly. And I knew I wanted to stay in the business and in the industry. I had to get out. The 2 times I said that it happened, I had to get out. One, because I was pushed out, and that would have really damaged my confidence. It might have even stopped my career in PR. I had to get out before I was pushed out, and also I didn't see another route. There wasn't any option, sadly.
But I think that's fine. I feel like whilst you say it's a key thing that you remember, it's a key thing that you remember because it was a case of you were treated really poorly. I'm sure in your mind you're like, I'm not having that again. And also, they try to break you, and it's like, well, actually, I'm not having that again. And actually, my ideas were really good. I can look back on it now in 2024 and think it was great. So again, it wasn't a me thing. So I think that's also really important that you've come full circle and seen that moment as well as a teaching moment. It's just a teaching moment for you, wasn't it? A very hard teaching.
It's definitely a key learning that I've taken away with me. And, if I ever get asked for advice from, people coming into the industry, I'll always give them some lookouts, but I'll always, kind of be very open and honest on a one-to-one basis. I've just never told that story on anything.
I appreciate you sharing it. I really do. I think someone out there will definitely, appreciate that. And I was going to say, how was it handled? But obviously you handled it yourself by removing yourself from the environments. Was there any examples of maybe racism where it was handled well from your experience, or that, maybe somebody else tried to speak up for you? Or is there any have you ever seen anything in particular in your career where you thought, I wish I had spoken up in hindsight, maybe?
Yes. The other place of work that didn't work out, and that I felt that the color of my skin, again, that I was employed, I wasn't I wasn't just brought in by a friend of a friend. It was very much, I went through, 3 interviews to get into this role. And again, this was head of fashion, a very big agency. And it just didn't make sense how it kind of then went, the line that it went, the trajectory that ended up being my story at that particular agency. And there was an incident where I wish that I had spoken up, I wish that I had um, kind of reprimanded, even though they were more senior than me,
Mhm.
some people in the business that weren't really being inclusive, weren't being diverse. And the sad thing is, on the back of Black Lives Matter, the same agencies are having bursaries for Black-owned brands, working with lots of Black-owned brands. But I was told at many agencies that I worked at, you know, if I suggested us going for Black-owned brands or working with a Black designer, at that time, they weren't as fashionable. They weren't as attractive to these agencies because they didn't have the big budgets. They weren't going to be able to afford our retainers for a start. One of the reasons why I started Future Brand Thinking was because it makes more sense that my background and my wealth of experience is put into brands that I truly believe in and those that are run by people of color, because there was a time in my career where I didn't have that opportunity. I couldn't take those brands on, not for love nor money. There was no way my bosses were kind of looking at the figures and looking at the bottom line and saying, this is just not going to work out in your timesheets. You're going to have to spend lots of time on this brand because the journalists don't know it. But that's how all brands start.
That's
That's
all
why we're
start.
That's
Exactly.
how we get into it. But it's because the main thing was because these brands didn't have the retainer budget. So that we weren't, the conversation just stopped there. But what I wish that I had done is just kind of pushed a little bit harder instead of kind of just going, okay, well, it's not my business. Like, as in, I don't own this
Don't
business.
own it.
I am
Yeah.
a senior member of the team, but I just don't have this autonomy. So there's a lot of times where there was a blatant kind of discrimination, in terms of these people were really talented. These brands are now doing really well, but, I could have been the one championing and bringing those brands into light with press and talent and influencers, but I wasn't allowed to, I wasn't permitted to at the time. So I really wish that I'd spoken out about that. Another couple of instances were when we would have interns that were of color. And a lot of those interns came from inner city London backgrounds. And, they were brilliant. They were so brilliant. And one intern that we had at an agency is now head of a massive agency that's doing so well. As in, she's founded that agency. She's also the founder of a really amazing Black communications platform. I'm sure lots of
Oh,
people know who I'm talking
I think
about.
I do.
She was an intern with us, and when she interned with us, I remember having a conversation with the owner and my direct boss, and I was like, I think we should keep this person on after their internship, because that's what we did. We kind of hand selected some of the interns. We had loads of interns because we were doing shows, we had loads of clients. Interns kind of ran the press office side of our business.
Yeah.
And they weren't being paid. So the inner city interns, especially those of color, I just never saw them getting the job afterwards. So I was like, with this one particular person, I was like, we should definitely keep this person on. She's so brilliant. She's worked so hard. And I was told in not too many words that her accent was too common, and all she had was a London accent, an accent that was just very normal. It wasn't street.
Yeah.
It wasn't thing. But that was, at one point, I was just like, this is me on my way out.
Yeah.
Because
It's
if I'm not,
ridiculous.
if there's an intern, when there were other interns that started around the same time, but they were kind of very upper middle class girls that weren't of color,
Mm-hmm.
um, that looked the part.
Mm.
As my old boss used to say, they're very aligned with the agency. And I kind of looked at myself in the mirror and I was like, well, I'm definitely not aligned with the agency. There's not one person in this agency that looks like me. And now you're telling me that I can't bring people in that
That
look
look
like
like
me
you.
to
Yeah.
make this more diverse and inclusive. So that agency, I had to leave. There were other things that happened, but I resigned from that agency as well. And there was a million things that
Yeah.
happened at that age made me think, no, but one that will always stand, in my mind and I'll always remember was being told that, in other words, they were saying that they sounded too black or they sounded too common or they
Mm.
sounded too this, you
Mm.
know, and my particular accent is very palatable
Yeah.
to a lot of, white, let's call a spade, agency owners, because um I think, again, my upbringing, it was my parents. The Queen's English was spoken at home. They were from
Yeah.
Ghana. English was the first language that they learn in Ghana. If you go
Yeah.
to, a good school, that is the language. Both my parents spoke fluent English really well. They would often say, correct me on my grammar, correct me on my pronunciation. So kind of my accent came from that. So
Yeah.
obviously I was quite palatable to a lot of people, but that wasn't me trying to be palatable to
I was
them.
just
That's
you're
just
just being yourself at that point, weren't you? Yeah.
that's the accent I have, but
Yeah.
it still offended me and made me very cross that I was being told this amazing black girl that then did turn out to be like the most amazing pro,
Mm-hmm.
um, did had a, too much of a, can't even remember how it was put, but it definitely
London
wasn't.
accent, eh? The
Yeah,
London
yeah,
accent was just not wanted. Yeah, interesting. But
yeah.
I think that's
And
interesting.
it was
I
very bizarre. But yeah, those are my, like I said, my career has flourished. My career has been brilliant. I've learned from these instances. It's not something that I harper on or I hold on to. It's just that for the very first time, I think it's important that I talk about these experiences, and hopefully someone will learn from those experiences and do what I didn't do, and
yeah.
that is just speak up. And I think that 20 years down the line, you'd feel much more comfortable. I also was very career driven
Mm.
and I kind of ignored a lot of things, and
Yeah.
I just was right for me. Yeah.
Right. No, thank you. I appreciate you sharing that as well. I think that's really, really helpful. And like you say, like I say, this podcast is about sharing our stories. And we're all going to have our own journeys of how we got into where we are and some of the challenges that we face and maybe things that we've handled. I just think it's important that we share and we can learn from these sharings. If we don't, have an understanding, then we can't grow from that. And also for employers that are listening, that they can actually listen and hopefully take heed of some of the things that can be really problematic in the workplace. So no, I think that's
Yeah.
really helpful. Thank you so much.
This series is sponsored by the PRCA's Race and Ethnicity Equity Board. To learn more about REEB and its mentoring scheme, visit prca.org.uk/REEB.
So I wanted to, because you
Sure.
mentioned, growing up and having basically the way speaking the way you do because of your parents. My question for you is about code switching, because I suppose maybe for yourself, you might not necessarily feel like you have to. So do you feel like we can lead with our authentic voices in the workplace, or will we be forever code switching?
That, that question is really interesting and I love it actually. I feel that I personally haven't had to code switch too much,
Okay.
but I've seen it happen.
Yeah.
I would say in my younger days and my roles as a younger, less experienced PR, there was probably an element of code switching, because I just had like a completely different background to a lot of the girls that I started out in fashion with. When I talk to my team now and I say, 24 years ago, the girls that were in PR and the girls that I kind of grew up with, that didn't look like me, they were very much kind of middle class, or some were upper middle class.
Mm-hmm.
They had country homes, they came from public or private schools. They were very, very privileged.
Mm-hmm.
And this was a career, but it was also the career that they had before they settled down with a hedge funder or someone very wealthy, and then they transitioned into that life.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of very privileged people that I worked with that had a very different background to me. So at the weekends, I remember this, people would talk about going to their country pad or going to see their grandparents in Oxfordshire or Cambridgeshire, and I was like, oh yeah, I'm going to see my cousins in Croydon.
Yeah.
Like, it was just very different. I also, had in some people's eyes a privileged upbringing. It wasn't like that, because my parents were, we're diasporians. I was born and bred in the UK, like my brother, but my parents came from Ghana. My dad came to study. My mum came to join him. But they both came from quite affluent backgrounds in Ghana, so that kind of trickled through to our upbringing. So, my brother went to a public school. I didn't. I went to a state school and did very well from going to a state school. But we did have a nice life, both parents. We lived in a nice house.
Mm.
Our parents owned our house. So there was code switching to an element because I was so different from, but I didn't have to code switch as much as I probably saw some later down the line when there were a few more black girls in the industry. I saw them have to. And now I would say that I very rarely see it. And I definitely don't advocate it. And I would just say, please, if you're coming into this industry, it's not going to change if we're not our true, authentic selves. So I definitely, at this stage of my career, especially owning my own agency, very anti-code switching. I don't have to do it for anybody, and I will not do it for
Won't
anybody.
do that. I think that's fair. That's fair. Thank you for sharing that. And where would you say you became, well, it sounds like immediately I'd gather, but when would you say you became aware of the color bias within our industry? So how white it really was? Was that kind of almost immediate for you? Or was that more
Yeah, very, very immediate. Yeah, very immediate, because I just didn't see anyone that looked like me in my first job. It was an in-house role. It was the whole of head office. So it was buying, merchandising, PR, visual, merchandise. Like, it was just so much, so many different elements and departments in the industry, all working in one head office. And I was the only black girl. Like, so it was very, very obvious, right, even from that I was gonna be one, if not the only black girl in every single organization I walked into. And that did carry on for quite a while. I went to a big agency called Exposure straight after that role at Kukai, and I loved it there. I worked there for 6 years. And there was myself. There was an amazing PR called Joe Reynolds, who's now a big lecturer at the London College of Fashion. My friend Dawn Mason, she kind of left the PR world and she's now a talent agent and talent agency founder. And then there was another mixed race woman. So in that agency, there was 4 of us. But then I looked around at other agencies and there still weren't people of color. But I think that agency was owned by an Asian guy and a white guy. So I think diversity was always important to them. And that's probably why that was one of the only agencies that you would see for black women in senior roles. I wasn't quite senior then, but I did build myself up in that agency. Yeah.
It's really interesting, isn't it? It was really interesting. And particularly, I think that's, I don't know, based on some of the conversations that I've had, that's quite prevalent in the kind of fashion side of things back then in particular as well. Coming up, it's quite a white industry. I mean, I always share that I did a bit of an internship with a fashion PR And it just put me right off of it because they were so anti-black. Like when I suggested a few of the publications, they were like, absolutely not, that is not who we're going for. So it was really interesting. And they were a small agency at the time, but were definitely anti. And I just remember feeling that kind of feeling of, what is going on here? I don't know about that. So I
Yes.
can you imagine
It's
you pushing
interesting.
through in your journey and how much you had to push as well.
Yeah, it's interesting when you say that about Pride magazine, The Voice newspaper, Black Hair and Beauty.
Mhm.
Those were magazines that we were never in. Like we
Yeah.
never pushed our clients. And that was really unsettling for me
Yeah. Me.
back in the day. Because I was like, but why? So you're not pushing anything to a Black audience, so we don't spend money then. Like, okay. That did not make sense, but it was, they kind of brainwashed me into understanding the reason why. It was like, oh, they've not got enough of a reach, the circulation's too low. There was all kinds of different, oh, look at the
Excuses.
fashion pages, really bad fashion pages. It even got to me so much that once I was gonna contact Pride, and I was gonna kind of anonymously kind of contact them and just say, look, I've worked in like 5 agencies now and I'm a PR professional and I haven't been able to pitch to you our brands because the brands themselves and the agencies don't consider your title to be worthy. And, there were a few little things that they could be doing better. Shoots, they didn't have the budget. The shoots weren't as great. The models weren't as great. They couldn't afford the big makeup artists and things like that. So I think that, now it's still different, but it's still not on the target list for many brands and still not going to pitch their brands to those
I think it's a
titles.
shame. I think they're missing out on a cohort of people there. So yeah, I found
Yeah,
that
yeah.
really off-putting. So I remember doing that and I just thought, I don't really want to be part of this. And I just didn't like the vibe that I was getting from them. So they put me off of fashion PR. That another one I done some work with. And I just felt like there was no black people in the building. I just felt very out. And I have, going into like corporate PR, which is a lot of my background is. Again, I've been the only black person in the room. It's just that I was still able to push some elements, like some of the campaigns that I worked on. I made sure it featured people of color. I made sure that I was pushing it towards people of color. And, so it's difficult, but I can only imagine you've been in some of these rooms and having to try and push and fight and trying to get these, like you said, 5 agencies, and they're all like, no, no, no. Like, but obviously we've come full force now, and, you've got your own agency and you can target whoever you want. But it's just fascinating, thinking of how they're thinking. They don't care about the black pound. It's as simple as that.
There was no metrics, there was no papers, we weren't shouting loud enough and saying, hang on a minute, I spend this much. Now there's figures about how much we spend in beauty, how much we spend on hair, much more than our white counterparts. So at the end of the day, brands have been forced
It had to be false. That's what's interesting to me, is because we were just an audience I didn't care about, because that reminded me of my dissertation that I'd done on, the amount of money that black women spend on hair. And I graduated in 2000. So that was years ago that I did that report. And even my lecturer was a bit like, wow, Ebony, this is huge. I was like, yes, it's massive audience that they are not targeting, because they just haven't done the research. So, and I was doing research at that point, but I just find it really fascinating. I really do. But moving forward slightly, when did you become aware of the ethnicity pay gap, and what are your thoughts? I don't know if you're aware that the PRCA's Race and Ethnicity Equity Board, they put out a report. They've also got a guide out at the moment about the ethnicity pay gap. So, I mean, I'm sure for you, because you've spent so much time in-house in agencies, was that something that you was aware of as you was kind of moving up and you've got maybe counterparts that are like, oh, I'm on this, and you're like, hang on a minute, or did that happen to you?
Yeah, I've never really been aware of it personally, just because I'm like fiercely private about. I would never discuss like what I'm being paid with my friend, even like my close friend working in the same agency, maybe even in the same role. But I am aware that obviously it's a thing because it's proven, there are papers on it. I think the bigger problem for me was getting the job in the first place. So having the, kind of securing the role, not me personally getting the job, but just in general, women of color or men of color getting into those roles. So once they're in the role and then, they're being paid less than the person in the same role, that was like a problem. But the real problem in my eyes was them being able to get the role in the first place. For some of those agencies or big in-house roles, notoriously have a person that they have in mind. That's why it was so, I mean, I think it standed some people when I went to this lingerie brand, they were like, oh my God,
I bet.
How did you get that role? Even at one of the agencies that I worked at that wasn't great for me in the end, a lot of people said, oh wow, that's a they were trying to be diplomatic, but that's an interesting move for you. What they meant was that's a very white agency, and how have they put you as head of fashion?
Right. Okay.
So the pay gap is something that personally I've not been too aware of. I can't give you examples of when it's affected me, because I haven't known about my counterpart's salary, and they haven't told me, haven't asked, they don't know mine because I've not discussed it. But I do know that it exists, and I think the bigger problem is getting into the role in the first place to be able to even know if you're getting paid less or more than a white counterpart.
I think it's interesting, and I thank you for that. I think it's interesting because I think what is happening now, and needs to happen a bit more, is that you've got some agencies who are now supposedly coming out with the gaps, the reportings. And not many are doing that as much, but some do, and I think that also helps to even the playing field. But no,
I think it's very important we're aware of it, and if I was still being employed, I would probably be a lot more aware of it, and but I've worked for myself for a while now, so
no,
been me specifically.
It's not as much on your radar, obviously, as you're the employer now, so it's fine. Okay, and obviously you'll make sure everybody's taken care of. I know that. That's fine. Okay, so thoughts on allyship. What does it really mean to you, and what would you say has been a good example of allyship?
Oh, in what context?
Work-wise. So, there's always talk about allyship, particularly with the focus around, people of color within the industry, maybe helping to make sure that, there's more equity in spaces. Or maybe even within your career, have you had maybe an ally that has maybe helped you navigate your career along some ways, or maybe even advocated for you? Because I feel like allies are those who are advocating for you, whether you're in the room or whether you're not in the room, And if someone came back and said something about, Michelle's this, they would say, well, actually, no, Michelle's really great at what she does. They'd advocate for you. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, I mean, your example of how you were introduced to me is an example of allyship. I feel like I hope that I make a mark wherever I go, especially with my business, my new business. We are built on kindness and transparency, inclusivity and diversity, not as marketing buzzwords. We live, breathe, it's part of our business. So I hope that there's quite a few people that I feel are allies, and a lot of those allies, controversially, are not people of color. Or a lot of my allies, and I think a lot of Black women will tell you this in the industry, a lot of my allies, a lot of the people that put me forward for new business, a lot of people that have put me forward for the things like the gig that I did for this lingerie brand that then turned into a role for me, were not people of color. I find it the most frustrating situation where there are people of color at the top and they don't put the ladder down for you to climb up. And I don't know if that's because a lot of people maybe have a perception of me as she's done it, she's already made it, she's successful, blah, 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 blah. I started a new business at 43. Crazy times, the end of a pandemic, post Black Lives Matter. But I kind of wanted to spend the rest of my career working for myself, having that autonomy and working on brands that I wanted to work on and that I wanted to share with the media and the industry, right? So I, sorry, I've lost my trail of thought.
That's all right. We were talking
Sorry.
about allyship. You were saying like about dropping the ladder down,
Yeah,
right? And not
yes.
always people of color that do
I
that.
feel, I feel that, I've had such great allies in people that are not of color. And those that are of color have said, maybe given me a lot of verbal around being there for me or wanting to help me, or they are my allies, but no real actions. And I will say that in every kind of interview or this kind of opportunity that I can, because I think it's really important. We touched on it in our panel talk last week. We have to help ourselves, and there's room for everybody. And I think that's a really important thing. And I don't think that's as a community, I don't think that's our fault. I think we're led to believe that if we've got it, we have to keep it. We can't share it. There's only room for us. We can't then help this person because then that's closing the gap in on us. Absolutely not.
No, it's enough for everybody. It's enough for everybody.
And I do feel that allyship is something that we have to keep talking about, because there's some people in top jobs in places where the few that influence many, there's people that can definitely send out 10 ladders to 10 different people to kind of help them get up. But and then those people send those ladders back down.
Exactly.
I honestly feel that allyship is something, it's a really good question. I think allyship is something that absolutely needs to be driven more. We need to be, we need to be allies of each other. We need to really push that agenda a lot more, because currently, if someone was to ask me, how many, kind of people of color, let that be women, men in your industry, outside your industry, have helped you with future brand thinking or along with your career along the way, very few.
Interesting. That's really interesting.
And I know a lot of people at the top. Yeah.
Yeah, that's really interesting, because I feel like, as you say, there is a certain stigma about people of color getting to the top and pulling the ladder up and not dropping it back down for others, sort of gatekeeping. So I think that's definitely problematic. So I feel like, yeah, absolutely, people of color can also be, of course, allies. Everything, you've got your white allies that are also, your gatekeepers, who can also help do their part as well, which obviously is something that we also talk about. But your point about it, people of color being allies is a very key point, in the sense of that's an important thing that we have to keep going. We can't just expect it just to be on the white side. We have to also be open to helping each other as well. So I think that's interesting.
Absolutely.
That's really interesting, because whenever I bring up allyship, people always go for they always they think about from the white perspective, because that's, a lot of it is to do with, gatekeeping and what can they be doing to help improve things on a wider scale. But yeah, I think you made a really good point. So thank you for that. Now, moving into your motivations, what would you say, what motivates and inspires you to keep going?
Oh gosh, mainly my children.
Oh.
I definitely think my sons, showing them, kind of what hard work is, helping them to understand, how what hard work will get you in the future, because I think they come from a generation and a world that is a little bit a lot faster than when I grew up. There's social media, gaming, there's a lot of awareness around wealth and how, but my 8-year-old talks about Bugattis. I wouldn't have even known what a Bugatti was at 8.
Definitely not.
And yeah, and because of, and we limit a lot from them, social media wise, but they still see and hear loads, whether it's their friends or the little that they are allowed. So I feel like it's really important to me, for me, to show them the right path. So I think every day when I wake up, I'm motivated by my business. I love my business. I love what I'm doing. I love my team. My clients are great. but I do look at them and I'm like, this is why I'm doing this. This is
Mm.
your legacy. Whether you choose to carry future brand thinking on in its communication sense, or if you pivot and make it a different kind of business around communications and marketing or whatever, they are my legacy, but they're also my motivation. So I think that's important. The other important thing to me is the new generation and people coming into the industry of color. My team is very diverse. We have a Spanish girl, we had a Southeast Asian girl, we had an Indian girl from Delhi. It's very female heavy. We very rarely have boys in the team, but
PR is quite female
you
heavy though, in general
know,
terms.
it's not for any other reason, but it's mainly females that apply for the roles or come in on internships. But yeah, I'm motivated by my team. I'm motivated by my family. I'm motivated by my business, and I'm motivated by the future. Hence why my business is called Future Brand Thinking. I want to see more people of color coming into the industry, and that is enough to make me want to drive the business forward. And that's enough for me to come out of my comfort zone and tell people more about the business and what we do and the industry, and help, which will hopefully will help them to navigate, how they kind of process information and experiences as they carve out their careers.
Yeah, great. No, thank you. What would you say you found the most challenging so far in your journey?
I think, do you know what? I'm going to kind of go a bit out of the box. I think financially, the industry is not kind of built for, even if you do come from a kind of a comfortable family background like myself, I feel like, if you come from a Black or a people of color background, you're less likely to have stacks of, kind of cash behind you, and to be as financially, how do I say it, comfortable as maybe your counterparts that aren't of color. So anything from internships to how you navigate running a business like myself, starting a business with no um, uh, kind of investors or anything like that. So for me, as a small Black-owned business, cash flow is really important because I'm dealing with lots of small brands.
Yeah,
So kind of, I still, whether I get paid or not, I still have to pay my team. I still
absolutely.
have to pay my rent.
Yeah,
And I don't have backups of surplus amounts of
yeah,
money because we are still small, we are still growing. Like I said, we don't have investors, we're not bought by a bigger company that can kind of like help us with cash flow whilst we're waiting for clients to pay and things like that. So cash flow, I think, from this end, like where I am now, and then from right at the beginning, internships, we offer our internships, and internships are normally expenses paid, or if it's an intern volunteer role,
mm,
it's expenses paid because it's more like a training
yeah,
situation. Sometimes if it's that you're actually working on, projects in a proper working capacity, so you're not training, you're learning really, you're actually have specific roles, then they are paid, but they're not, hugely paid, or they're very few hours or very few days. So
yeah.
it's not lucrative, but it's the only way you can, get a job in the end, because people always want to know, and I do as well when I'm employing someone, how much experience you've got, even while you're studying and things like that. So I think people of color find that really difficult because they often can't afford to do an internship,
Mm,
or they can't afford to kind of stop a part-time job so they can do an internship.
yeah,
So I feel like that just weighs against, at two levels, at this end that I'm at with a business that has a slightly erratic cash flow,
mm,
because of the types of businesses that I'm working with. Apart from the bigger brands,
yeah,
smaller brands have their own cash flow issues. So that
yeah,
does have counter effect
Knock-on
on us.
effect. Yeah, of course.
Absolutely. And then, from the entry point where you're trying to do work experience, or, you might take a role that's part-time, but, you also have to work another part-time job, which means that a lot of the time you're quite exhausted. I find that with a lot of our interns that come in, the ones that can really kind of push through are the ones that either come from a more wealthy background or they're not of color.
Right. Yeah.
Sadly.
Because they might have the
Yeah.
cushion there to be able to do that, as you mentioned. Interesting. So that's one of the most challenging things you're finding in terms of trying to piece that together, as well as,
Yeah.
So that's really interesting. Really interesting. Now, excuse me, I usually ask this question about, what is it that you would want from your employer? What makes a good working environment? But as you're an employer, you can answer that with your hat on. So to you, what makes a good working environment, and what does, good DEI look like for you?
Yes. So, like I said, we're built on diversity and inclusion. So, it's really important for me that that is demonstrated the minute you walk into our office. You look around and you're like, oh my gosh, there's all types of ethnicities here. There's all types of cultures here. And I think that's like the one thing I love when new, kind of new clients walk into the office, they're like, oh my God, this is amazing. This is like exactly what it says on the box. Like you are what you say you are. So for us, it's about the representation of the team. You're not going to walk into FBT and only see Black girls or Black boys. That is not what we're built on. One, we're built on just brilliant people and people that can do the job, but also it's really important to me that you see all types of people and backgrounds in the agency. That's kind of really, really, really important to me.
Yes, absolutely. I agree. I think that's good. And I suppose throwing it back with your employee hat on, what made a good working environment for you? Because you've worked in lots of environments. What was like something that
I guess the other thing that we're really built on is kindness. And I toyed with how much we were going to use that word within communication, because I didn't know if it made us not sound serious enough or whatever. And I spoke to a lot of my HR friends that are like really, really senior in big companies in HR. And they were like, no, Michelle, like definitely have that front, center and back of everything you communicate about the agency when you're interviewing people. Tell them you're a kind agency. Our office, our space, our community, our business is a safe space, not only for our team, but for everyone that comes into the business, whether it's a client or a stylist or a journalist. We are open, we're kind, we're transparent, we're approachable. So for me, that's really, really important. Creating a business and an agency, that's what it stands for. It's not, we talked about this on the panel that we did again last week. It's not a flaw, it's not a disadvantage to be kind and to be nice. In the industry of PR, especially fashion, you are kind of like taught, or not even taught, there's a perception that you have to be kind of really hard-nosed, devil wears Prada, like
definitely
not
it has
nice,
it has that perception as being kind of mean girlish,
mean girl, rude, all of these different things. You absolutely not. I've never been like that. No one could ever say that I just don't think that that's a way forward. And I think it's really important that when I was able to build a culture from scratch for my agency, that was really important. So having a kind, warm, approachable, diverse, and truly inclusive agency is something that I find really important. And, it's part of the values and DNA of future brand thinking.
Yeah, well, thank you for sharing that. I think that's lovely. I think that's really nice. And I think being kind is, goes a long way. I was saying to somebody else on the podcast recently that I feel like at this point, it does feel like as you look across the society, that there's an empathy chip missing from a lot of people. And I'm just like, Absolutely. What is going on here? So it's really nice to hear something like that. So thank you. Now, I want to touch on your proudest moments. So what would you say has been your proudest moment? It could be work, can be personal. And what would you say has been a career highlight for you?
Yeah, Proudest moment personally, again, I'll harp back onto my family, are my children. They make me proud every day. Um, it's one of my biggest achievements, kind of birthing them, bringing them into this world and navigating, bringing up two young Black boys in London.
Yeah.
I feel like that's really super important. They are mixed race. They're my husband, their dad is white, but the way they're perceived, they are definitely of mixed heritage. They
Mm.
look like they're of mixed heritage, but the way we've chosen to bring them up is as Black boys, because that is how they'll be perceived. And they understand it to an extent. They're only 8 and 11, but they, that is how we've decided to
Yeah.
bring them up. And they are definitely one of my greatest achievements. Professionally, I feel before I started Future Brand Thinking, I would have said when I successfully launched Juicy Couture into the UK, when I worked on the Elle Style Awards and Elle magazine as their publicist. There's been amazing career highlights throughout the 20 years. I would say that my most recent is setting up Future Brand Thinking, and for it to have, survived a really, really tricky situation and, world situation of the pandemic. We started just as the pandemic was kind of easing, but there were still restrictions. We still couldn't go into the office full time. We still only had a few people in the office at every time. It was a really tricky time to navigate, but I'm very, very proud. It's one of my biggest achievements. We are now going to be 4 years old. I never in a million years knew from the onset that it would, we would still be going, because anything could happen. We didn't know a pandemic was coming. There's been crazy situations around the world that could have
Yeah.
led us to kind of throw in our hats. So yeah, that's to date, my family, my sons, my biggest achievement, and Future Brand Thinking, launching it 4 years ago.
I love that. I do. I think that's very nice. So, what are your thoughts on how the industry will evolve over the next few years? Because there's a lot of talk about AI and things like that, and obviously you are future brand thinking. So, what
Yeah,
are you
I
thinking?
think without yeah, without kind of trying to ignore AI, because I'm very, because I grew up and I grew my career in an age where when I first started working in PR, many publications would fax us their
Yeah,
requests.
yeah. Back in the
And
day,
even emails were like, it felt like such a long time before every journalist and every stylist was using email. So
yeah.
when I tell my team that, they're like, oh my God, that is absolutely
It
crazy.
is crazy because
So
I think back as well,
yeah,
and I think doing work experiences when I was younger, and I think, yeah, like the fax is a big deal. I remember having to fax things over, like back then.
yeah,
It's like
it
you
is
cannot even imagine having to worry
absolutely.
about a fax now.
Yeah, it's absolutely nuts. So AI, definitely, we're kind of incorporating it more and more into our business. It's something that's not very natural to me. So I do love the youth. I do love a youthful team,
Yeah,
because I feel that that brings kind of loads of newness and loads of future thinking. So my team is quite young. We're small, boutique. We're kind of small and mighty. There's some brilliant, smart people in the business, and they're very kind of future, digitally driven. So I kind of allow them the space to kind of
yes.
grow that side of the business. So AI is definitely it's unavoidable. It's going to make all of our lives easier. I just personally have to get my head around it, if
Same
I'm
here.
honest. I think from our side, working with Black owned brands, the future is looking really bright, because I'm not there's just so many more brands entering into that space. So many more people of color are having the courage to start their own beauty, fashion, lifestyle interiors. There's lots more artists coming into play. I think the world looks beautiful with the amount of Black owned run and led brands. There's a lot of talented and smart people out there. So I'm just hoping that the future is that, it won't be such a niche.
Yeah.
We're already starting to see it, a lot of hairdressers are launching their own products because they've worked in the hair industry for so
Yeah,
long.
for so long.
There's a lot more spaces that we can buy our products from, that are mainstream. So a lot more big, department stores are stocking Black-owned brands. So for me, that's what the future looks like, that it's a norm rather than a niche.
Yeah.
It's something that we don't just talk about during Black History Month.
Yeah.
The brands just kind of just go into, that's a brilliant hair brand, that's a brilliant beauty brand, that's a brilliant fashion brand. It's got nothing to do with the fact that it's Black owned,
Yeah.
because we become more mainstream, more attractive, and more accessible.
Mm, absolutely. No, I appreciate that. Really interesting. Really interesting. And then we touched on this a little bit earlier. So what kind of advice would you give young people of color considering entering the industry?
I would say where possible, and that goes back to what I've said before, where possible, try your very best to make as many connections as you can. And, be honest, be transparent. If you need to work a job as well as studying, but you also need the work experience, the internships, come to the table with what you can do. I can only do 1 day a week, or I can do two, but try and get as much practical experience as you can, because the studies alone aren't going to get you a job. And I've got to be really transparent about that. I, as a small business, can't afford to employ someone straight out of uni with a first in communications if they have no experience at all, no internships. And really, it's not even just like 2 weeks, 2 months, 6 months. You need, like, no one will probably tell you this, but to get an actual role, an entry level role, business owners like me and even medium-sized businesses are looking for a year minimum. And some people say, well, how am I meant to get that if I'm studying and I'm doing this and I'm doing that? Somehow, in your summer holidays, in all the breaks that you get, whenever you can, maybe consistently work 1 or 2 days with an agency, to just build up your practical experience. Because especially if you're out of someone of color and you're not maybe got the same connections as someone that isn't, I feel like as much practical experience as you can get is important. Networking, in the age of social media, you can contact most people via social media. Whether they get back to you or not is different, but networking as much as you can, knowing your industry. So like really, really going out there and really, really going out there and, kind of doing the research, reading Business of Fashion, looking on WGSN, looking at Women's Wear Daily, looking at even like retail trade publications like Drapers. Just make sure that you know your industry, because even as an intern, when you come into our business, I'm going to ask you questions to make sure that you really are serious about this industry. And if you can't answer simple questions about brands and the industry, I won't think you're serious. So don't do the bare basics, kind of, delve deeper, dig deeper, dive in, get to know the industry that you want to work in.
Okay, that's helpful. And where do you go for industry/peer support?
I'm really lucky. Being in the industry for such a long time, I do have a lot of kind of allies in the industry, and a lot of friends, the true friends. I've worked with them, really, really good friends. And I go to them a lot. Other agency owners, like I'm really good friends with some agency owners, and people on paper might think, oh my God, like, aren't they your competitors? But like I said, I'm a true believer that there's room for everybody. So if that person is a friend and they own an agency and they've been doing it for longer than me, if I'm having a few issues or a few doubts, I will call them up and ask them for industry, support, help, or advice. Yeah.
Right, that's really helpful. And for those out there, if you're looking for industry support, There's also the UK Black Comms Network. I remember they are really, really great. Obviously, you've also got PRCA. They have the Race Ethnicity Board, which has a resource called PRISM, which is public relations, inclusion support, and mentoring. So mentoring is also really helpful. So if you're out there looking for support, check out mentoring schemes. I think UK BCN also has that, PRCA, and obviously you've got CIPR as well. So if you're looking for industry support, there are ones out there. And as always, if you need some sort of mentoring, reach out to us as well. So thank you. So moving into mindset. So this is like my last section, my favorite section I like to kind of tap into. So how do you deal with the internal mind war? So how do you manage things like self-limiting beliefs?
Oh gosh, this is a really hard question. I always go back to why I'm in the industry and why I'm doing this. Like when you talked about motivations and kind of what inspires me or what, you know, leads me to keep going every day. So when I'm kind of, we all feel like imposters sometimes. We all have bad days. I think I always go back to the roots, always why I'm in this industry, and I'm still in this industry for a reason. So I can't be terrible at what I do. I might have, lack confidence now and again or kind of thing, but that's easily kind of resolved when you look at you look at your successes, you look at your achievements, and you excuse me, go back to the reason why you're doing this in the first place. So when I'm feeling like that, that's kind of what I do. I just go back to the roots, to the grassroots. Why am I in this industry? Why am I still in this industry? What motivates me to keep going? What are my key motivations? I also want to make Future Brand Thinking a household name. So, brands that are led by people of color plus sustainable brands know us as the agency to come to and grow with as well. So not just, whilst they're small and then they go off to a big agency. I want us to be known for being able to deliver from, kind of small, kind of grassroots up until when that brand's huge. So I have to just remind myself of all these reasons why I'm doing this. Crazy enough to start a business in a pandemic. And then I kind of, all those kind of self-doubts and things like that kind of go away.
Yeah, that's really nice. I think that's good. You kind of reaffirm yourself. Looking back over your journey, would you do it all over again?
Oh, yes, 100%. 100%. Like I said earlier on with some of the questions, there's loads of things that I would do differently, and I would speak up more in the beginning of my career. And I would probably just take more things head on and just be a little bit, bit more ballsy.
Yeah. Well, that's cool. I think that's really nice that you do it all over again, just a few tweaks.
Yeah, 100%.
We like
Yeah,
that.
100%. With a few tweets and a few pivots along the way.
Yeah, that's always good. So over your journey, what would you say has been the sort of best and the worst advice you've been given?
Oh, the best advice would be from my dad, and I mentioned this in an interview I did with the UK Black Comms Network actually recently with Cam and her team. Was from my dad, which was he said to me, Michelle, you have to know where you came from to navigate where you're going. So that's about ethnicity, that's about background, that's about loads of different things. So just knowing yourself, being your true, authentic self will help you to navigate what lies ahead. So I think that was the best advice from my dad, my late father. Worst advice? Ooh. I think I wouldn't have left an agency exposure that I loved had it been that someone had said to me, you definitely have to move to get like loads more money. And at that stage, I should have waited a little bit before I moved for money. And I took a role because they offered me back then it was like a lot of money. It still is now, like 7K more than I was earning a year to
Mm-hmm.
go to this agency. And I had no other reason to leave but that. And I think someone had mentioned to me previously, you're not going to get a pay rise here because it just takes long. If you're in the same place, you have to move around to get, and that the elements of that are true,
Mm.
but I wish someone had said like, well, this is the way it goes, build yourself, stay here for a while, build your career especially while you're doing so well, and then maybe leave for a big money move. I
Yeah.
kind of prematurely left for a big money move.
Okay. Okay. That's an interesting one. Interesting. And my final question to you is, do you have any rules that you've implemented to help you along your career journey?
Mm. Rules. I wouldn't say rules, kind of rituals and things that I do that help me are I still do to-do lists, and I do them in like on paper. I do them in a productivity kind of book
Okay.
that I bought.
Okay.
Um, and I do it in there, and I still like ticking things off. Like I don't always get to, but I feel like that's a big rule for me, like to write my things to do that day and then do like a big overarching one for the week. And that comes in different formats because then I might also do a list on my phone, and then I might do one in the office, but this one place that
Yeah.
has like the overarching is like my kind of rule of thumb. Um, yeah, I think work-life balance is something that's really hard as a small business owner, especially if you're a person of color trying to build a small business. But I am trying to put rules in place and kind of um, making sure that I don't tip that balance too much. It's hard to do that, but sometimes you almost have to give yourself rules like must leave at this time, must do this, So those rules aren't fixed, but they are rules that I give myself. Yeah.
Sure, sure. Well, thank you so much for that. That has been
Thank
amazing.
you.
Thank you for
It's been
joining me
brilliant.
today
Thank
and
you.
sharing your journey with me. It has been lovely to speak with you and to hear all about that. So thank you. Now, if anybody wants to contact you, where can they find you?
Future brand thinking on social media, so LinkedIn and also Instagram. And if you kind of communicate with us, we answer all our DMs. So if you communicate with us via our social platforms, if there's then a bigger or further conversation, we can share emails across the team or my email. But yeah, the best place to start is with our social
Perfect.
platforms.
And don't forget, she's also on LinkedIn as well. If you want to link in with her. So she's also on.
Yes.
Perfect. Well,
Yes.
thank you so much for coming on, Michelle. It has been amazing speaking with you. I will
Oh,
be
thank
back.
you, Ebony. It's been brilliant.
You are most welcome. So, of course, to my listeners, I will be back with some more wonderful people from the world of comms very soon. Until then, stay blessed, stay tuned, and bye for now.
Bye.